Hi guys, welcome to Paces Space Yard, the second test preview for Pakistan versus Australia. We have a very special episode for you today, a guest episode where joining us is Atif Nawaz from Gorilla Cricket. He's also a stand-up comedian. He's from London, I think, right now.
Yes, that's right.
And then we have Jared Kimber, the guru of freelance cricket journalism, now writing for Cricinfo. Also a filmmaker on the side, and our not so resident Australian expert. And then we have the Cricket Couch, who's been with us a few times before as well, and he's there in Dubai right now, and also on this amazing world cricket trip, which we'll get into soon. I think we'll talk about that a bit as well. And then we have Media Gag joining us, one of our resident experts. He's in Dubai as well, bringing the Pakistani side of things. So we'll start off the show. I wanted to just start off with a sort of like what the neutral's perspective is from Jared or Couchy on how you saw Pakistan's performance in this first, and then we'll get into Australia. Like, were you surprised on like how Pakistan was able to perform with such a weak bowling attack? Anyone, like Jared, why don't you?
I wasn't surprised because they were playing Australia, and I suppose you assume if they're playing Australia that, had they found three blokes on the street and just asked them if they could bowl spin and they'd turn up, they would have bowled pretty much the same, and Australia would have played it pretty much the same. So, I think it was on Guerrilla Cricket. Atif was talking about how, Yasir was a nepotistic pick and people didn't even rate him. Well, we still don't know how good he is. I think his technique looks amazing. He's the most exciting leg spinner I have seen in about a decade. But he was playing against Australia, so you do have to hold that back. So I think Pakistan, they produced the soy pitch. Australia is rubbish on soy pitches. They got a little bit of spin. Australia can't handle spin. They got a little bit of reverse swing. Australia can't handle that either. They won. It's a proper, normal Pakistan UAE game.
Subhash, are you there? Okay, we'll go to Atif on what his thoughts were.
It was amazing, really, just to see Pakistan come back. I mean, I watched the entire one-day series and the T20 as well. And it really felt like there was a huge gulf in the class of the two teams because Australia was so far ahead. I know Pakistan historically have done really well in the UAE, but still just did not see that coming. I mean, when they were 7 for 2 at the start of the first day, we kind of thought, okay, I don't think anybody was surprised with that scoreline 7 for 2. I mean, if they'd gone on to 79 all out, nobody would be surprised either. That's kind of where we saw the game going. But all of a sudden, we saw something we haven't seen from Pakistan in the longest time. Backbone. It was amazing to see Pakistan just kind of come through that spell, get loads of runs. It was a beautiful partnership that started with Azhar Ali and Yunus Khan. And, they batted so well together. They went pretty much into their shells earlier on. I think Yunus in his first innings got something like 10 from 72 balls, which, was quite torturous. And I remember getting a lot of text messages from friends saying, yeah, Yunus ko thoda tez karo, please. Because he was going at a snail's pace. But everything about the match for Pakistan just went right. They were pretty much in control throughout the entire game. There was just that one session and a half where Rogers and Warner were going really strong, and they got that first wicket partnership in the second and first innings. But aside from that, it was game Pakistan all the way. I'm not used to that kind of dominance as a Pakistan fan. Even if it was Dubai, it just kind of left me a little bit speechless.
Yeah. Talking about that pace of the test match, how much do you think, any of you, how much do you think slowing down the pace affected Australia, because they're used to playing, at a higher run rate most of the times. So do you think that, that scoring around that 2.25 run mark affected Australia? Because we saw that with England when they came over. They struggled with that as well, like finding like what the right pace was in the UAE. Couchy? Can you hear us?
I think it's just a still image, which, to be fair, to represent his amazing good looks. He needs to be able to move and talk.
He looks a lot like a Bollywood villain in that pose as well, doesn't he?
Hassan, why don't you take that one?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think Pakistan's side, no one is that good at basically tuk-tuking and not putting pressure on themselves, because Pakistan is sort of used to this whole 2.5, 2.6, and they don't panic if they're playing at that rate, because for quite a few of them, it's pretty natural to play at that rate. But I mean, we saw with the Doolan dismissal in the first innings, for example, he played a few balls from the spinners, couldn't get an easy single, and ended up getting run out because of that. I didn't think he got a single run off a spinner in that innings. So basically, I think the fact that they can slow them down, it sort of frustrates a lot of teams, whether that be England or whether that be Australia. South Africa is the only team, I wrote this and we mentioned it in the previous paces as well, that South Africa is the only team in the UAE who have scored at over 3 runs and over. And even the one test that Pakistan won against them, the first test, they scored at under 3 and over in both those innings. So Pakistan's strategy just seems to be to basically force teams into panicking and giving them wickets.
Yeah. Were you surprised, Jared, by Australia's team selection at all? Because I for one thought that Glenn Maxwell might have been a good pick, seeing that he has sort of, like this history against Pakistan, that he has performed well. Plus, he has played in the IPL so much, he's used to these conditions, and he played well in the one-day series as well. So I was a bit surprised not to see him in the 11.
I think they would have seen that as a risk. I don't think you're necessarily wrong, and he probably, looking back on it, probably should have played. Although I don't think his bowling is anywhere near Test match standard. And he's one of the few bowlers in world cricket I'd pretty much happily face without any fear of being embarrassed by. So I can understand that. I think the batting might have been the more important thing. They could have easily left out Mitchell Marsh, who I think probably in those conditions is a bit muted in that I don't think he can score big long innings because he's not that sort of guy yet. He's very young and he likes to hit the ball very hard.
Yeah.
I don't think he can bat for a very long time, and his bowling is not really ever going to be suited to those conditions. So maybe what they would have been better off doing is picking Maxwell instead of Marsh and picking Faulkner instead of Steve O'Keefe, and going down a completely different sort of route altogether. But they didn't lose this because of selection. I mean, that's just, they lost it because they don't have the bowlers who can consistently take wickets. Had Ryan Harris and Mitchell Johnson been there, we could talk about the slow pitch all we want, but had those guys been there, I think the two of them probably would have found a way to get through Pakistan's batting. Probably in the second innings, that's when Ryan Harris would have really come out. So not having Ryan Harris is a big problem. But Maxwell, you would think that the only place on earth that looks like he's unbeatable as a batsman is in the UAE. So it would be worth probably just throwing him in there and having a go. And he's the sort of guy, we saw Warner, we were talking about all this slow batting and all this sort of stuff. But when Warner really got going, the run rate, looked after itself. If you have Warner and Maxwell both doing that, and they both come off in one innings, that's going to make a huge dent in Pakistan. So I think that's Australia's best bet now, is just to, forget all the bullshit and just throw them in and tell them to have a go. And Faulkner's another one who I think his batting is probably as good as Mitchell Marsh's is in those sorts of situations. Faulkner could easily hit 70 off 30 balls. And so that's what Australia has. Australia doesn't have Alex Doolan is probably not up to Test level. Jordan Silk is probably not up to Test level. There's all the sort of backup batsmen who are bat quite slowly for Australia, the sort of guys that make an innings. None of them are quite up to that level. So in the UAE in a two Test series, why not throw in Maxwell, who can just smash it a bit?
Yeah.
But don't you?
Go ahead.
I think that because of Pakistan's struggles against left-arm spin, particularly Herath, obviously O'Keefe isn't of that. We talked even before the first test about having a slow is going to be important. And regarding the Johnson-Harris point, one of the keys that Emil Shahzad and Sarfraz and on the record and off the record talked about, the whole plan against Johnson was to basically not play him, and just basically took him away. As in, the first innings he gave away 39 runs in 30 overs or something like that, even though he had the burst at the start. So if there isn't a Harris on the other end applying the same sort of pressure, obviously Cyril can do that as well, but he doesn't have the skills that Harris has. To use the cliche that these guys use, don't you think other teams will start playing Johnson that way as well?
Yeah, but you can't play Johnson like that. Yeah, it's quite easy to play him like that on a pitch that's made of Play-Doh like this one was. I mean, even some of us could go out and play him a little bit on this pitch. You can't just wait for him to bowl to you at the Wacker while he's ripping your throat out. You can't wait for him to bowl at you at Johannesburg, when the carry is taking the ball right to the boundary line and places like that. And your left arm spinner point, I know what you're saying, but if you start picking teams, and Australia has done this a lot in the past, if you start picking teams based on the fact that you think the other team has a slight weakness against one kind of bowler, basically what you do is you're picking a shit bowler because it might work. And it never, ever works. Xavier Doherty was picked in 2 Ashes tests to play against Kevin Peterson. There are still parts of Xavier Doherty left out on Adelaide Oval if you go out there now. So that is the worst way to pick a test team, which is why I've always thought that Australia's biggest problem is they get to India, they don't do it, and they've done it in Pakistan, and they're now doing it in the UAE, where they suddenly think, we need 2 spinners, we need 2 spinners. If you don't have 2 quality spinners, don't do 2 spinners.
Yeah. Can you, like I don't know much about Mitchell Marsh, so can you go into a bit detail, like what is like the ideal situation they're looking at when they're selecting him? And the comment that came from Clark before the test began, like he could be a future Australian captain. That's not something you hear from Australia. That's something like Shahid Afridi would say about Ahmad Shahzad, and he can be a future captain or something like that.
He really says about himself. I think and Mitchell Marsh. I mean, we have to go back to when Mitchell Marsh was a young man. He basically became an alcoholic at about 18 or 19. He picked cricket over football and decided that at that stage, with his family connections and how good he was at cricket, he could go out and get pissed every night. Turned out going out and getting pissed every night didn't really help him, and his career sort of hit the skids a little bit. And he never made any runs, and he was always handy with the ball. But, I mean, let's be honest, I don't think he's any better with the ball than, say, a Tom Moody, Jacob Oram type of guy. He's never going to be a star with the ball, but he might be handy at times. He's quite tall and he's quite strong. But he can definitely bat. He's just a bit of a dumb idiot. He's just a bit of a lug and a bit of, he's a lovely guy. I mean, he used to tweet back and forth to me all the time, but most of his tweets were, him trying to get me to get him to get laid on Twitter and stuff, or him tweeting about some girl in he's that sort of guy. And say he's a future captain, I think it's a huge call. He has nothing but talent in his body, but whether we ever see the most out of it, he's only, 22, 23 at the moment. It's a big call to say he could be a future captain. Yeah. What they want, though, is they want a number 6 who can bowl 15 overs a day. MS Dhoni, when he played in England, all he talked about was an all-rounder who could bowl. This sort of guy who can bat anywhere in the top 7 probably and can bowl you, 10, 15 overs a day. You can see England at the moment have about 19 of them lined up. They're not even sure which one they like best. All these teams, they play so much cricket, they realise how important an all-rounder is. So Mitchell Marsh could be the most important Australian pick, probably, in a very long time, because he gives them something that Australia's never really had, which is an all-round option. The problem is that he's young and he doesn't really understand his game yet, and you guys saw him. He's not a penetrating bowler, so on a pitch like that, it's sort of like playing Paul Collingwood. So there are problems with Mitchell Marsh. None of those problems involve his talent or his confidence. He certainly has those 2 things. And let's be honest, the boy can hit a ball. He may not always know why he's hitting it or how he's hitting it, but he can definitely hit a ball. And I think he's a far better cricketer than his brother, who's been pushed ahead of him for years. I think his brother is massively overrated.
Okay. Wanted to get your thoughts, and Atif, please feel free to chime in here, on Lyon. Because I was thinking that, he was going to trouble the Pakistani batsmen much more than what we saw. But we also saw this in India. I watched that series, and what happened was that he struggled to get what pace to bowl at on those pitches in the first few tests, and I think they dropped him, and he went and talked to one of the previous Indian spinners, I don't remember who, and then he came back and he bowled much better in the 3rd test, I think, in India. So do you think there's a similar problem here where he's struggling to find what pace to bowl at?
Yeah, probably. He's not the most talented bowler in the world. No one would ever say that about him. But the one thing that he's had over every other Australian spinner of the last 5 or 6 years is he's very good at working out how to survive. He's sort of the cockroach of off-spin bowlers in that he just keeps surviving. And every time you think, he's not going to get any better than this, he's not that useful, he finds a new skill or he works out how to slightly improve his technique. I know he basically got into world cricket because he could drop the ball, which is something that spinners don't get enough credit for. And when you watch him from side on, he gets so much drop and so late that you can see why he was trouble. He was hard for people to play. But since then, he's got a lot more side spin. Since then, he gets a lot more top spin. He's certainly changed his action, and he's got a far more pure, beautiful off-spin action than he ever had before. And like you said, in India, he worked it out by the end of the tour. So, unfortunately, in 2 test tours, you don't get a lot of time to really work that out. But, I mean, Artif's an off-spinner. He could probably talk about more of the technical stuff of working out the pitch. But there's no reason why he can't succeed, because he succeeded in far harder climates than this. This should be some, especially against Pakistani batsmen. I mean, realistically.
Yeah.
If I was a spinner, I'd probably pick Pakistani batsmen over any other batsman, because generally they think they can play spin and they can't.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, sorry, please, Hassan.
No, Atif, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I was saying, oh, yeah.
No, go on, Hassan, you're starting.
Okay.
Okay, I was saying, with the exception of Yunus is the only guy who's actually played spin well over the past, since basically Yusuf and Inzamam retired. And one of the things that Clark said on, I think it was day 2 or day 3, and which actually surprised me, was that he said he was surprised by how well Yunus swept against the spin of Steve O'Keefe. And I was like, Australia is supposed to be like famed for their preparation. I mean, I could understand if they didn't have enough footage of the bowlers. But if you don't know that Yunus is a good player, is a good sweeper of, against spinners, then what are you doing?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I felt there was a sense of under-preparation about this game. And, I mean, I don't know, maybe you can come back in, Jared, but I thought that maybe the Aussie players or the Aussie team or the whole setup kind of had one eye on the next series. There's, a day between this and the Australia-South Africa series, and they're going to go straight into that. So maybe they're holding, I don't know, Faulkner they see as somebody, they know he's a good player, they know he's going to be a part of the setup for a while. Maybe they want to hold him back for that series. I feel a little bit bad for Nathan Lyon, though, because I think I actually quite rate him. He's one of the only Australian spinners that's had a really long kind of, stay of execution. He's hung around for a long time. He's done reasonably well. He's actually put in some good performances. He's very much a grifter. He's not the kind of guy who's got he's not the most gifted in the world.
But he is exactly. Well with his, he is. That is what everyone in the world. If we can't make people start calling Nathan Lyon a grifter from now, I'm going to put it on Twitter right now. In fact, continue.
Yeah, sure, no problem. No, yeah, absolutely. So this is the thing. Nathan Lyon, he's a decent bowler. Everybody's allowed one game off anyway, right? And I think he had a lot of pressure on him because he's got Steve O'Keefe debuting from the other end. It's always difficult with debutants. I think the fact that Pakistan's debutants did quite well masks the fact that traditionally it's very difficult for debutants to do well. And really, if you look at them in more detail, I know it's not really a seamer's pitch, but Imran Khan, he showed a couple of flashes of, he had a couple of really nice moments, but in general, you wouldn't say, oh, this guy's going to be the future of Pakistan's pace attack. Not yet, anyway. Even Rahat Ali, who came back and he had some really nice spells, he didn't really, he didn't make himself this contender to lead the Pakistani bowling attack for the next 5, 6, 7, 8 years, right? He didn't come across that easy. So the fact that Pakistan's batsmen and their bowlers as well, to a slightly lesser extent, did so well on that pitch kind of masked the fact that it is quite difficult, especially for new players. I quite like the look of O'Keefe as well. I think he might end up sitting out the next game, and you might see Ben Hilfenhaus come in because to work to the principle that Jared was just saying, you got to pick your best players. You don't just pick players because you want to fill gaps and because you think you need to have X amount of players that fit certain quotas, i.e. spinners. But yeah, I think Hilfenhaus might be a better shout for Australia in the next game. Do you agree, Jared? Am I being a bit mean? Did they have one eye past this series? Not that many Australians are watching it. I know you mentioned to me yesterday that Foxtel always cover all the away series, so the Australian summer is the only one that really counts to them. But with less than sort of 30% of the country watching this series, did they feel like the pressure was off?
I don't think they feel the pressure's off because it never stops getting reported on, if you know what I mean. You're right when not that many people watch it, but that's the same as if they were playing India even if they're playing New Zealand, it's the same. And yet the pressure is not off on any of those series. It's just not as many people are watching. So I think there is a possibility. It does. The Yunus Khan thing worries me because it's a no-brainer. And I know there's this whole thing of Darren Lehman comes in and he says, oh, you know, we'll just have a beer and everything. But they're still doing a lot of analysis, so they still should have picked that up. But they're playing so much cricket, and there's a bigger series at home straight after this, and I don't mean South Africa, I mean India as much as anything. Then there's the World Cup. There is a chance that maybe they haven't come in as full as they did, and there's also there's no doubt that they think at the moment that Mitchell Johnson can basically paper over any wound, and realistically, in all but 2 tests since he's been back, he has. So I think there's a lot of different factors there, but yeah, I wouldn't say they're taking this as massively seriously as they would an Ashes or an Indian series, but it's a 2-test series, and that's going to happen in world cricket when you're sandwiching it in between a Champions League, who some of their players were still in the Champions League 5 minutes ago, and a series against South Africa that no one will remember as it's being played.
Oh, come on, there's no excuse for the Champions League. Lahore had 2 teams playing, one in Pakistan, one in India, exactly the same time. The Lahore Lions were playing in 2 different competitions.
Yeah, no, I'm not saying that's an excuse. I'm saying, but it's part of it. If they wouldn't have had players just before an Ashes playing in the Champions League. They would have had the players in a camp, and those players would have been hit around the head with canes and told to look at Yunus Khan's sweep shot for hours on end. Pretending he plays for England, which he never could. Although he's probably old enough to play for England in the old days, isn't he? But side point. But I'm just saying they take different. And this is the case for all countries. They take different series differently, and the truth is that they wouldn't have prepared for this as much. And maybe it has come back to bite them. I also think it was quite obvious watching them in the one days that they had massive weaknesses, but they kept winning, which sometimes makes you think, well, we'll get through in the test no matter what.
That's a good segue, your Mitchell Johnson point, into discussing him and his bowling. I wish Hammer was here for this conversation, but he isn't. But I thought he bowled pretty well in the first innings. I think it's just unrealistic to think that Mitchell Johnson is going to come here in these conditions and going to paper over, is going to roll over any other batting, Pakistan's batting or India's batting. In their conditions, but overall he bowled 30 overs for 40 runs, 3 wickets. That was pretty impressive for where the development that we've seen from him, where he was 3-4 years ago, and now Mitchell Johnson as a bowler. So, if your comments on that, Jared?
Yeah, well, you only have to look at what happened with James Anderson, Graham Swan, Peter Siddle. The problem is the big 3 teams, especially, they bowl so much, these bowlers, and they get essentially what happens is we've created this culture of cricket that we have to milk the players as much as possible to make as much money, which on the surface makes a lot of sense, except for the fact that for the next 4 years we could be watching Graham Swan instead of the fact that he's already retired. James Anderson hasn't been at his best for at least a year for a similar reason, and then you've got Peter Siddle, who eventually just lost pace. Now, Mitchell Johnson had the same thing maybe a couple of years before all these other guys. And I think when he injured himself, he was bowling at around 134 Ks. Now, him bowling at 134 Ks is still tougher than anyone else bowling at 134 Ks, but he needs to bowl at least 145 in order to break people's hands and to scare people and to get people to back away, to get the people playing at the cover drives they don't need to play at. So his break really helped him. But it doesn't change the fact that Pakistan would have come into this, and as Hassan said, they would have basically said to themselves, there's no point playing any balls that aren't on the stumps here because he's not going to get us out. I don't think there was a catch it, slip, or gully in this test off the top of my head, although I might have missed 1 or 2. And so it wasn't the sort of wicket where quite often he will get those sorts. He'll get the shots where he'll bounce someone, and the next ball they'll play the wide shot because that's what fast bowlers do. So he's taken all that away. The fact that he's come back and to become the machine and the animal that he is phenomenal. But he's not ever going to actually change a slow pitch. And I think that he bowled so well in the first innings sort of says so many good things about him because he didn't bowl as well in the very slow pitch at Port Elizabeth. So he's even learning, this is a scary thing for opposition batsmen. He's even learning now how to deal with pitches that don't suit him. which in the past he never really did. So he could still be anything, but he had to bowl in this test with Peter Siddle, who I'm not sure is really ready to be playing Test cricket. He had to bowl with Nathan Lyon, who, as we said, wasn't up to it, and 2 debutants who, realistically, are not Test bowlers. So I think that all they had to do was sit on him in this test, and that's what they did.
Yeah.
I think I'll wait for Emmer on that. As the reply to that.
Pretty well. There was that little spell in between where Johnson, sorry, don't mean to cut you off, man, but in the first innings where he was bowling to Misbah, and it was with quite an old ball as well, but he kept hitting him. I don't know if you guys remember, he kept getting hit on the shoulder, on the ribs or whatever, and it's not like there was a ton of pace or there was some demon pace coming out of the wicket. It wasn't bouncing awkwardly out of the wicket as well. It was just his 135 Ks or whatever it was. It was menacing on a Dubai wicket that had nothing for the bowler. That speaks to the the dehshat, as we say in Urdu, of the Mitchell Johnson bowler. It's incredible how scary and how threatening a bowler like that can be on a super slow wicket that he's hitting. Misbah ul-Haq has to count as one of the best Test batsmen Pakistan has, right? And he's getting constantly peppered with bounces and short balls that are striking him, so he's not comfortable. So it speaks to his skill.
There was a time I think it was at Pretoria when he was playing, and Ryan McLaren was batting against him, and I just thought, this is just wrong. He's going to kill him. And again, it wasn't even that fast a pitch. I mean, it had a bit of carry and a bit of pace, but it wasn't the whacker or anything, and it wasn't even Old Trafford on a good day. And you were just sitting there going, he's just. I've never. We don't get to see that much. I mean, even Bodyline. You look at the old clips. You could probably think to yourself in Bodyline, you could take a few of those on the body. With Mitchell Johnson, you think if you took 1 or 2 on the body, you'd have no body left. He's he's the next evolution of bowling, and it is actually there was that time when Stuart Broad didn't face up to him in Adelaide. If I was Stuart Broad, I would have just, while they were fixing the side screen, I would have just pretended I did my hamstring. Why should we have to face things like that? It's ridiculous, and the fact that he could do it to Misbah, who is a good batsman on a flat pitch. He is amazing, but he's not going to win Australia too many tests in the subcontinent or the UAE without really good help. Like I said, if you had him at one end and Ryan Harris at the other end, it's a whole different ballgame. And that's not to make any excuses for Australia either, because Pakistan are missing about their 7 best bowlers, by my reckoning, off the top of my head. Yeah. So it's not about that, but that's the thing, that they could sit on him a little bit, whereas Pakistan's bowlers all worked as our favourite word in cricket, as a bowling unit.
But another thing on that, I mean...
yeah, go ahead, Hassan.
That a lot of times when teams come to Asia, one of the things that they do is that they play 2 spinners. But what they don't do is, as in they don't realize the length to bowl, because Johnson has a natural length which is back of length. But I mean, someone like Hilfenhaus, who basically swings the ball, that sort of bowler always succeeds in Asia. I mean, obviously Stain's a far better bowler than Hilfenhaus, but Steyn has a fuller length and he averages like 22. And whenever you think of like South African or Australian bowlers who've done well, people like Gillespie or McGrath or whoever, they've always bowled fuller on dry wickets. And over here with Marsh and with Siddle, and as far as Johnson is concerned, I can excuse him bowling slightly back of a length, but Marsh and Siddle were still bowling the natural length that they bowl.
Yeah, I was surprised by Siddle a little bit. I was expecting him to be a bit more penetrative in these conditions, and maybe we'll see that in the second test. I wanted to touch on like the comment that you made that Australia think that Johnson can basically roll over anybody in those conditions. Like Michael Clarke to me seems like a very realistic sort of captain, apart from that statement about Mitchell Marsh, but. Like it seems like hard for me to think that he actually thinks that Mitchell Johnson will be as destructive as he was in South Africa or against England and Australia.
Yeah, but there's a couple of different points that you need to make here. First, Mitchell Johnson is probably, after Dale Steyn, I would say probably one of the best fast bowlers I've ever seen in Asian conditions. In fact, it was the first time I ever saw Mitchell Johnson really look awesome was in India. Yeah. He got his form back in the IPL recently. He can be, almost unplayable at times in the subcontinent. So you've got to remember that. And I'm talking about Mitchell Johnson at his best. Mitchell Johnson at his worst in Asia was pretty ordinary, but Mitchell Johnson at his worst pretty much anywhere in the world is pretty ordinary. So you've got to think about that. So he would have come with that in his mind. You've also got to remember the way that Australian cricket works. It doesn't work in a logical thing. The way that you're sitting there with your furrowed brow now trying to work out the deeper meanings of Australian cricket. Australian cricket doesn't sit there and think about these things. Do you know what I mean? What Australian cricket does is goes, we're fucking awesome. We're going to blow the heads off these Pakistanis with Mitchell Johnson. That's the way it has to think. Anytime Australian cricket has ever tried to be introspective, it's been shit. So what they have to do is they have to go into every single test match, every single game, every single environment, thinking we are so much better than anyone else, and we're going to beat, and we're going to kill them. Look at Ricky Ponting's comments about the Ashes. He spent the last few years of his career, Ricky Ponting, losing the Ashes, and yet when the KP thing all came out, he said, "Yeah, we knew they had a weakness." That's what the other team always has a weakness. Even when it's smashing you all over the park, they have a weakness, and we're just about to turn this around and kill them. So Michael Clarke and Australia, the way that the reason that they won 7 out of 8 tests in a row against probably the 2 best teams in the world at that time, England and South Africa, and they won them basically based on the fact that they just believed they were better than their opposition. And that was a big part of that was, riding behind Mitchell Johnson. So why not think that you can go to Pakistan and do the same thing? There'd be no reason why that a team would ever do that. There are probably some analysts in the back room looking at all the facts and figures and going, geez, we're going to struggle here. But the people at the front making all the decisions, making all the calls, they were, they were ready to probably celebrate from the time they started winning the one days, and maybe even before that.
A couple of questions here. Firstly, regarding the spinners, the Pakistani spinners, I mean, I think day 4, day 5, Lehman said that basically, day 4, I think it was Warner, day 5 it was, day 4 it was Clarke, day 5 it was Lehman who basically said that we keep getting out to straight balls, which was the exact same thing England were saying in 2012. I mean, again, going back to that point, I mean, that is what teams, apart from South Africa, whenever a team comes to the UAE, they Pakistan get a lot of LBWs with their spinners, and the thing with Australia was even in the second innings there was this tendency to push the pad ahead. I mean, there was no adjustment in their whole mindset. And regarding the mindset, do you think that in the second test they're going to go more hell for leather? Because Warner talked about basically how his whole strategy was to play the way he does. And even Ahmed Shehzad said that on this pitch, and rather on these pitches, it is far easier to attack than to defend.
Yeah, I think they'll just bat the same way that they always do and try to go out LBW less. I think the comment about missing straight balls is, I think it's a way of sort of saying that, I actually think it's a way of crediting the Pakistani bowlers and discrediting the theory that the pitch was doctored and Australia lost. Because Lehman, to be fair, for all of these faults, he's quite straight down the line. And you can't really say Australia lost on a spinning pitch when you just missed the straight ball a lot of times. What he's saying is there's a fundamental flaw in the way that Australia are playing spin, which is exactly what England were trying to work out when they lost over in the UAE. And you're right, too. There's something about the UAE that's different than pitches in India, Sri Lanka, and Pakistan, and it does bring in LBW so much more than virtually anywhere else I've ever seen. So it is something that Australia are going to have to look at. But as far as the way that they bat, you've got Warner, Smith, and Haddon, and Marsh, if he plays, are all going to be attacking. And you've got Clarke, who batters himself, and you've got Rogers and Doola, who'll be a bit more defensive. We're not going to assume that Rogers is going to come out and switch hit. Doolan's not going to run down the wicket and try and hit spinners for 6. So, do you know what I mean? They're not really going to change the way they play. They're going to, hopefully for them, play better. But Australia's big problem is the same as England's big problem, and it's the same as Shane Watson's problem in general life, is that they put their foot down and they plant it, and then they don't move it. And if you do that, especially under DRS laws, you're in all sorts of strife. And look, we saw it a bunch of times. I think they were lucky. They could have done far worse. Had Abdur Rahman played, I'm pretty sure he would have got 17 wickets.
I wanted to touch on that review that Clarke did not take. and like what was that all about? You know, like you would expect the best batsman to take the review. It was just like, did he not pick up the edge? Like, what was the? Do you know what was in his mindset in that time, or like I couldn't fathom why Clark couldn't take that review.
He just didn't think he hit it. I mean, I would have assumed it's that simple. It's one of the best fallacies in cricket, and it's been going on for years. This is the batsman always knows when he's hit it. I think we've seen through DRS over and over again that is utter bullshit. You don't always know you hit it. I once had a game where I was 100% sure I didn't hit it, but by the end of the game, the opposition had spent so long sledging me that I was convinced I probably did hit it, but I just didn't feel it. We only have to look at what Clark did right there, and how often batsmen hit the ground, or sometimes you can think you've hit a ball that you clearly haven't hit. There are so many different things. There's a fair chance that maybe his bat hit his pad, everything hit the. It was a very close thing where everything was sort of hitting something around the same time. You can't always tell if you've hit the ball, and I think it's as simple as that. And that's part of the reason why DRS probably is a flawed system. I mean, it's a flawed system in many different ways, but one of the reasons is we're relying on cricketers who are in the middle, his job is at that stage not to go out. His job is then to umpire as well. Do you know what I mean? He's got one job, not to go out, to try and score runs. For him to then and then have to go to the non-striker who's probably trying to have a rest, trying to work out the lay of the land, trying to work out how they're trying to get Michael Clarke out so he can help out. And then suddenly something happens and a bunch of men are yelling. The umpire gives it the crowd, well, in this case, maybe not the crowd, but the crowd are yelling and everything. And then the non-striker's looking around like a madman and like, what happened? Am I out? Should I review it? And he's like, oh, I don't know, mate. I wasn't watching. You can't say that, so he has to give a fake answer. And it's just nonsense. The whole DRS is nonsense. I personally prefer mistakes because I think mistakes are more honest.
To be fair, regarding the crowd,
there was still. You move on to the BCCI after the cricket info. Is that what the pathway is?
No. I'm not on the BCCI side. Although I will say this about DRS, right? Name another $1 billion sport, and that's what we're in now, $1 billion cricket industry, that would have brought in a completely new system of umpiring and then not even have it tested before they used it. Well, Tony Greig showed how it works on Channel 9. It must be good. That's where we are in cricket, and that's why the BCCI can get away with their ridiculous posturing. But it doesn't work as it is. The technology is never going to 100%. We're not even sure right now if Mitchell Johnson was actually out-stumped or not. Do you know what I mean? Technology doesn't answer these questions, and and then trying to get the player to make the decision. Imagine saying to Mitchell Johnson at the end, "We've given you out-stumped, but we're not sure. Where do you think your back foot was?" I mean, it's just nonsense.
Hassan?
Yeah, I was saying regarding the crowd, I mean, there was Friday onwards, there were at least a couple of thousand people, which is more than usually NSK or Qazafi have over 5 days. I mean, and most of them were wage laborers, basically Pakistani wage laborers who work here. I mean, I talked to one of them, I think day 3 or day 4 it was. I told Subhash about that as well. That basically, I mean, they were basically conversing, and one of them said, it's very rare that Pakistan wins, so at least then we have to turn up. So this crowd was actually a good crowd for Dubai, if you can imagine that way.
I mean, that's a whole other debate whether to have day-night tests over here.
Yeah, we have a film coming out about that.
What else did I want to bring up?
We have to pimp our two guests.
We have to what?
We have to pimp our two guests, and Gorilla and that.
Oh, yeah.
Can I just take a moment, by the way, to thank Subhash for his contributions to this podcast? They've been very much,
well, weirdly, he's probably been the most eloquent he's ever been. Hey, would you tell me about Guerrilla Cricket?
Oh, Guerrilla Cricket, you ask? I can give you some information about Guerrilla Cricket. Actually, do you know what? Just to go back to that point you made about the Michael Clarke not reviewing his dismissal. I think we were watching the game for Guerrilla Cricket, and I'll tell you all about that in a minute. Of course, I was watching it with Nigel Henderson at the time, Hendo, you might know him as, and we were sitting there watching, and the dismissal happened, and he didn't review it, and we saw the replay, and we thought, well, he obviously got an inside edge on that. Why did he not review it? And then Hendo, I think, made a really intriguing point, which is sometimes you've got so much going on as a captain in that situation where you're already kind of under the cosh, and you're thinking about the rest of the game, you're thinking about your innings, you've got so much going on in your mind, you might actually not even register the fact that you got anything on it. And then you might convince yourself, you might overthink it as well and think, well, maybe I did hit it, but maybe I should get out because I'm not batting so well and I've got other people to come and they might make the most of this as well. Maybe I should hold on to that review. Maybe tactically I'm supposed to use this review later. There's so many kind of mental plot holes you can get yourself into, mental potholes, I beg your pardon, you can get yourself into that you might just overthink it. And I think the DRS, I do like it, but I think there's more that needs to be done to it, and you've got to use it all the way or not, right? Because in this Test match we didn't have hotspot. I imagine that could have been useful in a few instances. That Mitchell Johnson dismissal was very much an anomaly, though, because I haven't seen that too many times where the shadow is behind the line, but the foot, it's not clear if it is or it isn't. If you had like a 4K camera filming cricket, you might be able to tell a little bit better whether or not his foot was behind the line. And I think again it was either Hendo, it might have been Gary Naylor actually, who said at the time that, well, you could either give it or not give it, and you wouldn't be wrong.
Yeah, I want, like, just before we get into Guerrilla Cricket and all, I'd like to discuss, like, looking into the second Test. Is it like Australia winning or drawing, is that more dependent on how Pakistan does? If Pakistan does a Pakistan and just completely crumbles, or can we expect Australia to, really turn it up, and even though Pakistan puts up a fight, that they can still win? Is that possible? Do you see that, Jared, happening?
Well, I think the most important thing is what we've seen. I think Australia batted pretty poorly in both innings, really, but they still made over 500 runs. Now, the one thing we know about Pakistan is they can easily make far less than that. So I would say it's Pakistan's to lose, really. If Pakistan yet again can put on, if they can put on another first innings, whether they bat first or second, of over 400, they're putting a lot of pressure on Australia. Whereas if their batsmen, revert to form or lack of, then that could be a bigger problem for them. I think that they can definitely keep Australia to at least 500 runs again, which should keep them in the game as long as they don't bat like complete morons.
Mm-hmm. Just one more thing. I mean, Jared, I wanted and Atif as well, your thoughts on the Pakistan debutants, Yasir and Zulfikar, and whatever the fuck has happened to Sarfraz over the past 6 months.
Yeah, well, I was. Babar wasn't a debutant though, was he? He has played before.
No. Yeah,
he's 2 or 3 tests.
Yeah. Look, I mean, he's clearly the sort of guy that Australian cricket would love to have in. Sort of guy who can play like Test cricket, play first-class cricket for years and test all your batsmen against spin, and then eventually come into the side if you ever need him. Australia would kill for a spinner like that. In fact, the closest we had to that was a Pakistani who we stole for a little while. But essentially, he's just a really good bowler. I think he bowled 3 balls. And I thought to myself, this guy is far too good for first-class cricket. It's such a shame that we haven't seen him playing Test cricket for the last 7 or 8 years. And then he got an edge, and I think it was dropped straight away. And then he probably thought to himself, well, what's the point of this? But yeah, Yasir, as I said before, I think he's got a strong front arm, which almost no young leg spinners have. He's got energy through the crease, which yet again is so underrated. It's a reason why Pakistani leg spinners are so good. They get through the crease so much better than leg spinners from around the world do. He's definitely got a very good wrist. He doesn't have a wrong and I saw there was some numpty that you guys were tweeting about that said because he didn't have a wrong he wasn't a complete spinner, which is obviously complete arse and means you know nothing about leg spin.
That's my boss.
You only need 2 things as an international spinner. You need a stock ball that can take wickets, and a stock ball spins and it can take wickets, and you need a ball that isn't your stock ball. And he's got a ball that goes straight on. So pretty much he's got those 2 things covered. As long as he keeps his front arm and he keeps his technique going quite well, and he probably, he probably just needs to work on working batsmen out a little bit more. Sometimes I thought he was rushing when he could have just, 2 chats with Abdul Qadir would be all he would need, really, to work out that sometimes it doesn't matter if you get a batsman out in 4 minutes or 40 minutes. It matters that you get them out, which is harder in a 5-man attack, too, because you're always afraid of being taken off. But I think he could definitely be a very good bowler, and I can see why he's he's taken so many wickets in the lower level, because he's such a natural wicket taker. It was great to watch him. But Artif will probably know more about the finger spin, because he's a finger spinning dynamo.
Thanks, Jared. Yeah, I mean, I've got to confess really that when Shah came in, I did some research on him. I remember James Sherwood, who does the jingles on Test Match Sofa, does little bits of theme music before every player comes on to bowl or bat. He had no idea about this player, and he sent me a list of Pakistani players and saying, "Well, tell me about these guys. You must know about them. You follow Pakistani cricket." I had no idea who he was. So, and the first bit of information I found about him was that he's a 28-year-old leg spinner, and he's Junaid Khan's cousin. So instantly, I mean, I can be forgiven surely for being a little bit cynical about that fact, right? Because Pakistan cricket, with there's a history of nepotism there. We've had 3 Akmals play for Pakistan, which is makes you shudder really. And I was thinking back to the Imran Farhat days, so I thought, you know what, I don't know, but as the game went on, and then we had that whole first innings of Pakistan batting to build the anticipation. Nigel the Bear Walker, another commentator on Gorilla Cricket, he was very excited about it. There's something about the debut of a new leg spinner that's quite exciting anyway. Even if you've seen a bunch of duff ones and you had to witness, as I did, Simon Kerrigan's debut in international cricket, you still have a sense of excitement about a new leg spinner coming in, and you want to see him do well. You want to see what he can do. And he did quite well, because his very first session, he had to bowl to David Warner, and Warner was going after him. He went for about 31 runs in his first 5 overs in international cricket. But to come back from that and finish the test with, 7 wickets in the end? I think you got 7 wickets in the end?
7 for 116, I think.
Yeah, that's right, which is like the best debut, I think, ever by a Pakistani leg spinner. That's extraordinary. And whether or not he goes on to become this great bowler that I guess as Pakistan fans we'd love to see him become, he certainly did something very useful for Pakistan symbolically, because here we are coming into a test match without Saeed Ajmal, who's not just our best spin bowler, but one of the best bowlers in the world, and we don't have him, and all of a sudden you don't miss him as much because you've got Babar from one end, who's looking quite threatening, mostly with his ball patch, if nothing else. And also, then you've got the Shah from the other side, who's a debutant, but showing a lot of fire. And the one debutant you guys didn't touch on, and I really want to get Jared's thoughts on this guy, is Imran Khan, right? Because Imran Khan, for my money, right? You can't really tell too much about him. I guess he's a seamer on a Dubai pitch making his debut, but he had all that swagger of a fast bowler, right? The upper body strength. He had the highlights in his hair. He had some mouth for the batsman as well, which I think, maybe he's about 5 test matches premature. I'm just grateful he doesn't have the Waqar Younis silver chain going on yet, the one that's a real staple of fast bowlers.
Yeah, he's probably, I kept thinking he was going to be slower than he was, and he was always slightly quicker than he was, or he was never quite as quick as he thought he was. So, So he reminds me, I suppose, a little bit of maybe like a young Peter Siddle, who really came in and just basically thought he was a lot quicker than he was, and maybe a little bit better than he was. I think he has talent, though, and he got the ball to move around a lot. At times, he probably got the ball to move almost as much as anyone for big periods of that. So I thought he was okay. But as you said, I mean, it's not the pitch you're really going to test him on. We have to find out if he can bowl on another pitch. But it certainly wasn't the worst. I think he out-bowled Siddle. So.
And
one thing that Paces PSR viewers would know and listeners would know is that we've been cribbing about the commentary, especially Ramiz Raja here at Paces PSR a lot. So one of the alternatives that is available out there for you guys is Gorilla Cricket, formerly known as Test Match Sofa.
Which is called Test Unhead, watching Steve Smith's debut, if I'm not wrong. Okay, so which is why I feel like I've seen all of Steve Smith's career, and all of a sudden he's turned into a great batsman. But maybe that's another subject for another time. Gorilla Cricket is basically a free online radio commentary service. You can go to gorillacricket.com or sportstonightlive.com and listen for free to ball-by-ball coverage of the entire Test match. We've done the T20, all 3 one-days, and the first test, and we're going to be doing the entire second test from Abu Dhabi as well. The curious thing about it is we kind of watch it. We watch the coverage on a television screen, mute it and then just do our own commentary over the top. And sometimes we'll go off on wild tangents and talk about other things that are in the news or other bizarre things that come to mind. But mostly the focus is on the cricket, and you've got loads of amateurs, people who've played league cricket in England commentating, just fans of the game like myself coming in and commentating. And we also have like interesting guests pop up sometimes. We've had people, who've played county cricket before, or people even international cricket in the previous incarnation. As Test Match, we had some crazy guests. Really, we had people as disparate as John Embury. I can never say his name properly. We had Sean Tate as well at one point come in. We had a bunch of county cricketers. Ollie Rayner, who you guys haven't heard too much about, but you will one day, I promise you. He's a Middlesex spinner. He's going to come through. Do you fancy Ollie Rayner, Jared?
Oh, I don't think he'll play for England, but
he's got a good a shot as anyone. Who would have thought James Treadwell would play for England one day? Anyway, so this is it. So if you are sick of listening to coverage on television, you can just mute your TV and listen to Guerrilla Cricket in your ears. Maybe you're in an office somewhere and you want to get coverage and ball-by-ball coverage. You can listen to GuerrillaCricket.com, and they'll take you through the whole game every day of the next test. And during the lunch intervals of each of the next game, we're going to have one of the Pace team, one of you guys, give us some expert analysis of what's going on in the match, some context. We're going to be talking to you guys for half of the lunch break, and an Australian correspondent for the second half, possibly Brad Mackay from BMC Sport or Dennis Does Cricket. So there's a few people that we speak to, but the idea is to keep it nice and balanced. It's difficult because they're all England fans apart from me, and they just really want to see Australia lose. So, but there is a good balance there, and we already appreciate.
You, of course, really want Australia to win, so that really balances it out.
Yeah, well, there we go.
Thank you, Atif. I can't believe we did not talk about Steve Smith. I do want to talk about Steve Smith a little bit. His progress, like we saw it in India, fleetingly, we saw him, that his footwork was really good, and he was coming along really well as a good player of spin. And we see here, we're kind of predicting that Steve Smith, along with Michael Clarke, was going to be one of the big wickets, and he proved that here, that with his immaculate footwork and the way he just played that second innings and hung in there. Also in the first innings, I think he just gave away his wicket. He was playing really well. So, Jared, your thoughts on him, and maybe thinking about promoting him up the order to number 3?
Yeah, I would assume he has to bat at number 3 in the next test. I'm not sure who else can bat there. I was always a massive fan of Steve Smith when he was younger, but I definitely lost all the belief in him for a few years in the middle. So I'm glad he's come back. Before he got picked in the Ashes, I believe I said that Australia would be better off picking a dead donkey than him because of the way he plays the moving ball. But one of the great things about Steve Smith is the fact that he just believes in himself. And it's just that thing we were talking about before, that Steve Smith, David Warner, and Shane Watson all had the same batting coach, a guy called Trent Woodhill, who I think, has he worked with Pakistan perhaps briefly, Trent Woodhill?
Yeah.
Yeah, he's a batting coach in Pakistan. He's probably not an ideal team batting coach, but he's a very good on individual. For instance, he would have got the best out of Shahid Afridi far more than any other batting coach would have. And he's a brilliant batting coach in the way that he goes about things. And partly he just says, forget about your technique. This is what you've done. This is why you're good. Now go out there and smash the hell out of the ball. And I think saying to someone like Steve Smith, forget about your technique, is the best thing that could have happened. Hopefully someone one day says the same thing to Phil Hughes. Because realistically, we get, the best technique I've ever seen on any batsman is Greg Blewett, and he failed as a test cricketer. So you don't need that, and that's a great thing about Steve Smith is I think he will make it one way or the other despite his technique, and believing in himself is a big part of that, and he clearly loves playing spin, so why not toss him in at number 3? I mean, Alex Doolan batting at number 3, I didn't believe it. Yeah. It was going to work when they first did it, and it's certainly not working any better now.
And the other thing people forget about Steve Smith is that he's only 24 years old, so he's very young still. He's already matured so much as a batsman in the last few years. You expect to see him do even better as time goes on. And I'm going to go ahead and say I reckon he's a good shout for the next Australian Test captain.
Yeah.
Well, he's the only option at the moment. So.
Well, you got Mitchell Marsh to think about, obviously.
Yeah, sorry, I forgot Mitchell Marsh. I think they only, Clark only said Mitchell Marsh just so that people would stop saying that Smith was the future Australian captain. But yeah, there's no one else who can take over the job at the moment. So, unless they bring in George Bailey and Clark, it has to be. Yeah, it's just, it's way too soon for him. But he's a very good leader. So,
do you think that he's got potential in terms of like actually becoming a good test level bowler? I think he just bowls a lot of long hops, but why is that? Like when he first came along, I thought he had it in him that we'd see him become more of a frequent bowler than what he has turned out to be.
I think his technique is flawed. I think for someone his size and his build, he should be running in more like Yasir Shah. Rather than trying to come in like he's Shane Warne. That doesn't work on a smaller man. It's not a repeatable action, which is such an important thing in leg spin, because if you don't have a repeatable action, it means that you bowl so many full tosses and long hops. So that's his biggest problem from a technical standpoint. But the main problem is he doesn't bowl enough.
Yeah.
He never gets a chance to bowl. And he should have... the best thing that could, if Australia really wanted to be an all-rounder, the best thing that could have happened was when he first came on the scene and he wasn't quite good enough, he then spent the next 3 years playing Shield cricket and bowling 20-over spells and learning how to become a bowler. He hasn't had the chance to do that, and the problem is he's been playing in T20 leagues and he's been playing limited overs cricket for Australia, and I don't even think he believes in his bowling anymore. So I don't think he'll ever be a good bowler. We see a lot of young cricketers who are good at leg spin, who by the time they're 23, 24, aren't very good at it anymore, and they fade away. And very rarely do they ever get better at it. Michael Bevan being one of the few batsmen I can think of who actually his wrist spinning improved as he got older. So I doubt that Smith is ever going to become a great bowler. If Australia can get 10 overs out of him a day, they're doing amazingly well.
I think the obvious comparison is Azhar Ali, who I think played under 19 for Pakistan as a first-line leg spinner, and basically has become a batsman who doesn't bowl anymore. And regarding the other,
Azhar Ali, there's Chandrapal, there's Atherton, there's Nasser Hussain. All these guys were really good young leg spinners. I mean, when Chandrapal was first picked, the first thing I heard about him was as a leg spinner. Now, there was a lot, he doesn't pick up a ball now unless he's, unless he has his bring a ball over.
You were born when Chandrapal was
I think there was an under 19. I think there was an under 19 World Cup in which Sarwan was the first or the second highest wicket taker.
Sarwan, I forgot he's another one. So do you know what I mean? There's a lot of these guys out there, and realistically, if they were slightly worse at batting, they would have worked harder at their leg spin, and that's the other problem here. Now with Smith,
that's what happened with Afridi.
He should have fought back into the side as an all-rounder, but because the side was so rubbish, he came back in easily as a batsman. And that's the problem. He should have spent. He shouldn't even be in the side now. He should be working on his bowling so that in future he's even more used to Australia. But the fact is they have no batsmen, so he sort of came back in by default, and he's batted so well that now he doesn't need to bowl anymore, which is a shame for leg spin fans, but good for him.
Yeah. And one more thing I wanted to ask you about. I mean, you talked about how Woodhill basically influenced Smith and basically told him to just forget about his technique. This is one thing that I've seen with one of the very few common things between Australian establishment, you could say, and the Pakistani establishment, is that the coaches basically judge batsmen not on the basis of their runs, but on the basis of their techniques.
Yeah, that's not an Australian and Pakistan thing, though. That goes deeper into the whole way that we think about the game. Mark Waugh is still remembered as a great batsman, but he averaged 42. Now, the reason he's remembered as a great batsman is because if you've ever seen Mark Waugh, it's batting porn, and he looks amazing. And this is a big problem right across the board. It's not just in Australia or Pakistan. Usman Khawaja is a perfect example of someone who looks like he should be a test batsman. Alex Doolan, Sean Marsh, there's a few of them in Australia. And you see them right around the world. You see these guys that come in, and they look like they can bat, and they get picked. And I suppose the zenith of this was when Adrian Shankar, the guy who faked his way into county cricket, essentially he faked his way into county cricket because people saw him in the nets, and he looked like he could bat, despite the fact he never ever made a run in any level of cricket he ever played, really, other than make 100 for Cambridge or Oxford or whoever he played for. So yeah, people who bat pretty always do better off, and they always get picked, and that's always going to happen. Until we get beyond that, and I don't know if we ever can, it's not going to change. That's part of the reason that Moneyball did so well in baseball, is so many batters who had been overlooked for years because they didn't have the best swings were suddenly getting picked because they were actually doing better statistically. And there's no doubt that you watch someone like Usman Khawaja and you go, God, he's got so much time. How could he not be a Test cricketer? Despite the fact that he might just not be a Test cricketer.
I think that we should wrap up the show. Thank you for joining, Atif, and thank you for sharing your thoughts, Jared. Hopefully, we'll have you back soon. And thank you to the Cricket Couch as well. He was there for.
Right.
So hopefully we can have the Cricket Couch back on during one of the days during the Test matches. So thanks for listening. Whoever was there live, I don't know if there were any live viewers, but we'll have the show up on SoundCloud and on YouTube. So thank you, and I think Atif is out. So.
No worries. Cheers, guys.
Thank you. Awesome. Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.
Yeah, they will say bye.